and it allows tremendous high performance. Now, what that means at another level is the frame rates that you need for smooth video are possible because you're doing it down in hardware and not maxing out your CPU. And we saw it on the demo on the netbook when, you know, netbooks don't have the best processors, right? I mean, if you're on the highest end Intel Core 7 or i7 Core, blah, blah, whatever, it's fast. Netbooks, low-end laptops, you need the GPU just for basic things like video playback. Of course, there's this other thing. By taking load off the CPU, you actually let the CPU do other things, which is actually pretty good when you think about all the other things going on, the JavaScript execution and compilation, the layout function that's happening, and other things that may be running on your system at the same time. So if you can move work off the CPU onto the GPU, you give the CPU more time to do the other things the browser's doing. So when we when we talk about GPU powered HTML5, it isn't only about graphics. That's kind of what I think about because that's what my team delivers. But by offloading the CPU, it helps your browser experience all up. Well, let's just go real straight. This is what we're talking about today as HTML5. And all of these features, except for the bottom two, video and audio, are in the platform preview that some of you probably downloaded, some of you haven't. Again, performance is important, not just JavaScript, but multiple dimension performance, cross-browser interoperability, both in the HTML markup, the CSS markup, the SVG markup, though honestly SVG is not too hard. I mean, because it's a well-established spec. DOM programmability, an area where IE hasn't been that strong, and John's going to walk through how we've made gains there. Graphics capabilities, which of course includes the favorites, alpha color and opacity, which have been big developer requests for a long time, round corners, multiple backgrounds, very important. And then, of course, vector graphics. HTML5 integrated SVG is the way we're seeing this. And it's very important to us to approach it from that point of view of SVG integrated in HTML or XHTML because we don't think that SVG diagrams kind of on their own, that's not where the focus of the web is. It's really on the integration of the two. You saw video this morning. We are saying the codecs we support is the H.264 video codec and an MPEG-4 container. And for audio, we do an MP3 stream, but also AAC audio, especially in the MPEG-4 container. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Image support, it's very important. We'll do a little bit in the demos here about supporting color profiles. There's a new JPEG spec out there, JPEG XR. It was Microsoft HD Photo for a while, but that's been submitted to the Joint Photographic Experts Group, and it's being standardized as JPEG XR. So again, we'll come back to why that's important, but raising the quality of the imagery and the color fidelity that you can do on the web. So with that, let me just take a break and go to the interoperable markup, because that's the cornerstone. Really, I think if you don't have the same markup and the same JavaScript working the same way, all the rest of this is neat, but it's kind of extra work. So with that, John, come on up, and I'll hand you the clicker. Great. You can go.
Thank you.
Thanks.
My name is John Hervatten, and I'm a lead program manager on the Internet Explorer team. My team focuses on kind of the core programming model, our developer tools, as well as overall IE standards engagement with different working groups. I've been on the IE team for almost 6 years now, and during IE8, I've worked on the built-in web developer tools, which hopefully many of you are familiar with. You've heard a lot about this idea of same markup, same markup, same markup, and in some ways it's become a rally cry for people on the team. We'll be sitting in triage looking through bugs, and it's, well, here's the way IE does it. Well, how does every other browser do it? And if they all do it one way and we do it differently, oh, that's a real bug. If few browsers do it differently, well, then you go back to the standard. What does the standard say? Let's figure out what the right behavior is and see if we can get to a consensus. And that's really how we work through all this. And this idea of same markup isn't a new concept, right? It's not a new ambition. It's something that we've all been trying to do for a long time. And IE8 delivered very high quality CSS 2.1 implementation, which let you write the same CSS markup and have it run interoperably across browsers. And the way you can think of IE9 is doing the same thing for the rest of the platform that IE8 did for CSS 2.1. There are always going to be some differences on the edges. Standards evolve. There are places where a standard may just be in a working draft as it's editing and changing. There are other times where a standard goes into last call or even further on into a candidate recommendation and then back into last call or actually all the way back into working draft. And it's through these places where you end up still seeing differences as new features are implemented in browsers. You also just have browsers choose to do different standards in different order. So again, kind of on the edges, on the frontiers, you're always going to see some level of differences. But the core platform and the set of things that you use every single day that you rely on just has to work the same across browser. And this is really what we're focused on for IE9. You saw this chart this morning in the keynote. This is a much less pretty version of it. You can tell I just wrote this one. I didn't have a team of people to make my slides all nice. But you see, these are the pieces of data that Dean pointed out even this morning. Index of is number 1, get element by ID, number 13. An add event listener is the highest ranking one that Internet Explorer didn't support until Internet Explorer 9. And our goal, what we set out to do here, is everything under this curve. This was our starting point. We said, what are the things that developers already use today on their sites, even if they're not in Internet Explorer? And we said, well, we just have to do all of those. And that's where we started. And then we looked at the scenarios. So we see add event listener, you see get computed style. You say, what are the scenarios that they enable? What are developers trying to do with them? And that's how we find with the other things we do, the things that aren't on this chart that IE9 should go implement. And that's how we got into a lot of the graphical richness and the features that Ted will talk about a lot more later on. Markup languages. Now I'm just going to get into some details about what exactly IE9 supports. I don't intend to teach all of these to you. There's a great session tomorrow that digs into SVG, and there are obviously great resources out on the web and more documentation coming from us and from others. But today I just kind of want to give you a kind of an overview of what are the things that IE9 supports. First one is, of course, HTML5. HTML5 is a very interesting spec. Although it's the 5th version of an HTML, it defines a lot more of the browser and more about the language than any other previous version of HTML. In some ways, it defines the gaps or the seams that were between other specs. For example, parsing. So how browsers parse these elements, if you remember back to Ted's chart, makes a huge difference in the DOM that you end up with. And we've done work in Internet Explorer 9 to make sure that we parse HTML in the same way as other browsers, particularly around how we handle unknown elements, to make sure that in doing this in a way that complies with the latest drafts of the HTML5 spec. Another very big addition that HTML5 provides is inline SVG. Prior to HTML5, SVG only worked either as a standalone document, .svg file, or within XHTML. HTML5 defines exactly how browsers should allow SVG to work in line with HTML5, and IE9 supports this. And as long as there is a nightly out that is turned this on by default in any other browser, IE9 is actually the first browser to support inline SVG out of the box. IE9 also supports XHTML and XML. So we're not doing only SVG inline in HTML, but also gives you XHTML. Many of you may have already done some things with XHTML and just served it to IE under a different MIME type.